Chapter 17. The Dying of the Dragons. Rhaenyra overthrown. Back in King's Landing, Queen Rhaenyra was finding herself ever more isolated with every new betrayal. The suspected turncloak Adam Valerion had fled before he could be put to the question. His flight had proved his guilt, the White Worm murmured. Lord Celtigar concurred and proposed a punishing new tax on any child born out of wedlock. Such a tax would not only replenish the crown's coffers, but might also rid the realm of thousands of bastards. Her Grace had more pressing concerns than her treasury, however. By ordering the arrest of Adam Valerion, she had lost not only a dragon and a dragon rider, but her queen's hand as well. And more than half the army that had sailed from Dragonstone to seize the Iron Throne was made up of men sworn to house Valerion. When it became known that Lord Corlys languished in a dungeon under the Red Keep, they began to abandon her cause by the hundreds. Some made their way to Cobbler's Square to join the throngs gathered round the shepherd, whilst others slipped through postern gates or over the walls, intent on making their way back to Driftmark. Nor could those who remained be trusted. That was proved when two of the Sea Snake's sworn swords, Sir Dennis Woodwright and Sir Thorin True, cut their way into the dungeons to free their lord. Their plans were betrayed to Lady Misery by a whore Sir Thorin had been bedding, and the would-be rescuers were taken and hanged. The two knights died at dawn, kicking and writhing against the walls of the Red Keep as the nooses tightened round their necks. That very day, not long after sunset, another horror visited the Queen's court. Rhaenyra Targaryen, sister, wife, and queen to King Aegon II and mother of his children, threw herself from her window in Maegor's Holdfast to die impaled upon the iron spikes that lined the dry moat below. She was but 21. After half a year of captivity, why should Aegon's queen choose this night to end her life? Mushroom asserts that Rhaenyra was with child after her days and nights of being sold for a common whore, but this explanation is only as creditable as his tale of the brothel queens, which is to say, not creditable at all. Grand Maester Munkin believes the horror of seeing Sir Thorin and Sir Dennis die drove her to the act, but if the young queen knew the two men it could only have been as jailers, and there is no evidence that she was a witness to their hanging. Septon Eustace suggests that Lady Mysaria, the White Worm, chose this night to tell Rhaenyra of the death of her son Maelor, and the grisly manner of his passing, though what motive she would have had for doing so, beyond simple malice, is hard to fathom. Maesters may argue about the truth of such assertions. But on that fateful night, a darker tale was being told in the streets and alleys of King's Landing, in inns and brothels and pot shops, even holy septs. Queen Rhaenyra had been murdered, the whispers went, as her sons had been before her. Prince Daeron and his dragons would soon be at the gates, and with them the end of Rhaenyra's reign. The old queen was determined that her young half-sister should not live to revel in her downfall, so she had sent Sir Luther Largent to seize Rhaenyra with his huge rough hands and fling her from the window onto the spikes below. Whence came this poisonous calumny, one might ask, for a calumny it most certainly is. Grand Maester Munkin places it at the door of the shepherd, for thousands heard him decry both crime and queen. But did he originate the lie, or was he merely giving echo to words heard from other lips? The latter, Mushroom would have us believe. A slander so vile could only have been the work of Larry Strong, the dwarf asserts. For the clubfoot had never left King's Landing, as would soon be revealed, but only slipped into its shadows, from whence he continued to plot and whisper. Could Rhaenyra's death have been murder? Possibly. But it seems unlikely Queen Rhaenyra was behind it. Rhaenyra Targaryen was a broken creature who posed no threat to her grace. Nor do our sources speak of any special enmity between them. If Rhaenyra were intent on murder, surely it would have been the Dowager Queen Alicent flung down onto the spikes. Moreover, at the time of Queen Rhaenyra's death, we have abundant proof that Sir Luther Largent, the purported killer, was eating with 300 of his gold cloaks at the barracks by the Gate of the Gods. All the same, the rumor of Queen Rhaenyra's murder was soon on the lips of half King's Landing. That it was so quickly believed shows how utterly the city had turned against their once beloved queen. Rhaenyra was hated, Rhaenyra had been loved. Nor had the common folk of the city forgotten the cruel murder of Prince Jaehaerys by blood and cheese, and the terrible death of Prince Maelor at Bitterbridge. Rhaenyra's end had been mercifully swift. One of the spikes took her through the throat and she died without a sound. At the moment of her death, across the city atop the hill of Rhaenys, her dragon, Dreamfire, rose suddenly with a roar that shook the dragon pit, snapping two of the chains that bound her. When Dowager Queen Alicent was informed of her daughter's passing, she rent her garments and pronounced a dire curse upon her rival. That night King's Landing rose in bloody riot. The rioting began amidst the alleys and winds of Flea Bottom, as men and women poured from the wine sinks, rat pits, and pot shops by the hundreds, angry, drunken, and afraid. From there the rioters spread throughout the city, shouting for justice for the dead princes and their murdered mother. Carts and wagons were overturned, shops looted, homes plundered and set afire. Gold cloaks attempting to quell the disturbances were set upon and beaten bloody. No one was spared, of high birth or low. Lords were pelted with rubbish, knights pulled from their saddles. Lady Darla Deddings saw her brother Davos stabbed through the eye when he tried to defend her from 3 drunken ostlers intent on raping her. Sailors unable to return to their ships attacked the river gate and fought a pitched battle with the city watch. It took Sir Luther Largent and 400 spears to disperse them. By then the gate had been hacked half to pieces and 100 men were dead or dying, a quarter of them gold cloaks. No such rescuers came for Lord Bartimos Celtigar, whose walled manse was defended only by 6 guardsmen and a few hastily armed servants. When rioters came swarming over the walls, these dubious defenders threw down their weapons and ran, or joined the attackers. Arthur Celtigar, a boy of 15, made a brave stand in a doorway, sword in hand, and kept the howling mob at bay for a few moments, until a treacherous serving girl let the rioters in through a back way. The brave lad was slain by a spear thrust through the back. Lord Bartimos himself fought his way to the stables, only to find all his horses dead or stolen. Taken, the Queen's despised master of coin was bound to a post and tortured until he revealed where all his wealth was hidden. Then a tanner called Wat announced that his lordship had failed to pay his cock tax, and must yield his manhood to the crown as forfeit. At Cobbler's Square the sounds of the riot could be heard from every quarter. The shepherd drank deep of the anger, proclaiming that the day of doom was nigh at hand, just as he had foretold, and calling down the wrath of the gods upon this unnatural queen who sits bleeding on the iron throne, her whore's lips glistening and red with the blood of her sweet sister. When a septa in the crowd cried out, pleading for him to save the city, the shepherd said, "Only the mother's mercy can save you, but you drove your mother from this city, with your pride and lust and avarice. Now it is the stranger who comes. On a dark horse with burning eyes he comes, a scourge of fire in his hand to cleanse this pit of sin of demons and all who bow before them. Listen, can you hear the sound of burning hooves? He comes. He comes." The crowd took up the cry, wailing, "He comes. He comes," as 1,000 torches filled the square with pools of smoky yellow light. Soon enough the shouts died away, and through the night the sound of iron hooves on cobblestones grew louder. Not one stranger, but 500, Mushroom says in his testimony. The city watch had come in strength, 500 men clad in black ringmail, steel caps, and long golden cloaks, armed with short swords, spears, and spiked cudgels. They formed up on the south side of the square, behind a wall of shields and spears. At their head rode Sir Luther Largent upon an armored warhorse, a longsword in his hand. The mere sight of him was enough to send hundreds streaming away into the winds and alleys and side streets. Hundreds more fled when Sir Luther ordered the gold cloaks to advance. 10,000 remained, however. The press was so thick that many who might gladly have fled found themselves unable to move, pushed and shoved and trod upon. Others surged forward, locked arms, and began to shout and curse, as the spears advanced to the slow beat of a drum. "Make way, you bloody fools," Sir Luther roared at the shepherd's lambs. "Go home. No harm will come to you. Go home. We only want this shepherd." Some say the first man to die was a baker, who grunted in surprise when a spearpoint pierced his flesh and he saw his apron turning red. Others claim it was a little girl, trodden under by Sir Luther's warhorse. A rock came flying from the crowd, striking a spearman on the brow. Shouts and curses were heard, sticks and stones and chamber pots came raining down from rooftops, an archer across the square began to loose his shafts. A torch was thrust at a watchman, and quick as that his golden cloak was burning. On the far side of Cobbler's Square, the shepherd was bundled away by his acolytes. "Stop him," Sir Luther shouted. "Seize him. Stop him." He spurred his horse, cutting his way through the throng, and his gold cloaks followed, discarding their spears to draw swords and cudgels. The shepherd's followers were screaming, falling, running. Others produced weapons of their own, dirks and daggers, mauls and clubs, broken spears and rusted swords. The gold cloaks were large men, young, strong, disciplined, well-armed and well-armored. For 20 yards or more their shield wall held, and they cut a bloody road through the crowd, leaving dead and dying all around them. But they numbered only 500, and 10,000 had gathered to hear the shepherd. One watchman went down, then another. Suddenly small folk were slipping through the gaps in the line. Screaming curses, the shepherd's flock attacked with knives and stones, even teeth, swarming over the city watch and around their flanks, attacking from behind, flinging tiles down from roofs and balconies. Battle turned to riot, turned to slaughter. Surrounded on all sides, the gold cloaks found themselves hemmed in and swept under, with no room to wield their weapons. Many died on the points of their own swords. Others were torn to pieces, kicked to death, trampled underfoot, hacked apart with hoes and butcher's cleavers. Even the fearsome Sir Luther Largent could not escape the carnage. His sword torn from his grasp, Largent was pulled from his saddle. Stabbed in the belly, and bludgeoned to death with a cobblestone, his helm and head so crushed that it was only by its size that his body was recognized when the corpse wagons came the next day. During that long night, Septon Eustace tells us, the shepherd held sway over half the city, whilst strange lords and kings of misrule squabbled o'er the rest. Hundreds of men gathered round Wat the Tanner, who rode through the streets on a white horse, brandishing Lord Celtigar's severed head and bloody genitals and declaring an end to all taxes. In a brothel on the street of Silk, the whores raised up their own king, a pale-haired boy of 4 named Geemon, supposedly a bastard of the missing King Aegon II. Not to be outdone, a hedge knight named Sir Perkin the Flea crowned his own squire Trystane, a stripling of 16 years, declaring him to be a natural son of the late King Viserys. Any knight can make a knight, and when Sir Perkin began dubbing every sellsword, thief, and butcher's boy who flocked to Trystane's ragged banner, men and boys appeared by the hundreds to pledge themselves to his cause. By dawn, fires were burning throughout the city, Cobbler's Square was littered with corpses, and bands of lawless men roamed Flea Bottom, breaking into shops and homes and laying rough hands on every honest person they encountered. The surviving gold cloaks had retreated to their barracks, whilst gutter knights, mummer kings, and mad prophets ruled the streets. Like the roaches they resembled, the worst of these fled before the light, retreating to hidey holes and cellars to sleep off their drunks, divvy up their plunder, and wash the blood off their hands. The gold cloaks at the Old Gate and the Dragon Gate sallied forth under the command of their captains, Sir Balin Birch and Sir Garth the Harelip, and by midday had managed to restore some semblance of order to the streets north and east of Rhaenys' Hill. Sir Medric Manderley, leading 100 White Harbor men, did the same for the area northeast of Aegon's High Hill, down to the Iron Gate. The rest of King's Landing remained in chaos. When Sir Torrhen Manderley led his Northmen down the Hook, they found Fishermongers Square and River Row swarming with Sir Perkin's gutter knights. At the River Gate, King Trystane's ragged banner flew above the battlements, whilst the bodies of the captain and 3 of his sergeants hung from the gatehouse. The remainder of the Mudfoot garrison had gone over to Sir Perkin. Sir Torrhen lost a quarter of his men fighting his way back to the Red Keep. Yet escaped lightly compared to Sir Laurent Marbrand, who led 100 knights and men at arms into Flea Bottom. 16 returned. Sir Laurent, Lord Commander of the Queensguard, was not amongst them. By evenfall, Rhaenyra Targaryen found herself sore beset on every side, her reign in ruins. The Queen wept when they told her how Sir Laurent died, Mushroom testifies, but she raged when she learned that Maidenpool had gone over to the foe, that the girl Nettles had escaped, that her own beloved consort had betrayed her, and she trembled when Lady Mysaria warned her against the coming dark, that this night would be worse than the last. At dawn, 100 men attended her in the throne room, but one by one they slipped away or were dismissed, until only her sons and I remained with her. My faithful Mushroom, her grace called me, would that all men were true as you. I should make you my hand. When I replied that I would sooner be her consort, she laughed. No sound was ever sweeter. It was good to hear her laugh. Munkin's true telling says not of the queen laughing, only that her grace swung from rage to despair and back again, clutching so desperately at the iron throne that both her hands were bloody by the time the sun set. She gave command of the gold cloaks to Sir Balin Birch, captain at the Iron Gate, sent ravens to Winterfell in the Eyrie pleading for more aid, ordered that a decree of attainder be drawn up against the Mootons of Maidenpool, and named the young Sir Glendon Good Lord Commander of the Queensguard, though only 20, and a member of the White Swords for less than a moon's turn. Good had distinguished himself during the fighting in Flea Bottom earlier that day. It was he who brought back Sir Laurent's body, to keep the rioters from despoiling it. Though the fool Mushroom does not figure in Septon Eustace's account of the last day, nor in Munkin's true telling, both speak of the Queen's sons. Aegon the Younger was ever at his mother's side, yet seldom spoke a word. Prince Joffrey, 10 and 3, donned squire's armor and begged the Queen to let him ride to the dragon pit and mount Tyraxes. I want to fight for you, mother, as my brothers did. Let me prove that I am as brave as they were. His words only deepened Rhaenyra's resolve, however. Brave they were, and dead. They are, the both of them. My sweet boys. And once more, her grace forbade the prince to leave the castle. With the setting of the sun, the vermin of King's Landing emerged once more from their rat pits, hidey holes, and cellars, in even greater numbers than the night before. On Visonya's hill, an army of whores bestowed their favors freely on any man willing to swear his sword to Geemon Palehair, King Cunny, in the vulgar parlance of the city. At the river gate, Sir Perkin feasted his gutter knights on stolen food and led them down the riverfront, looting wharves and warehouses and any ship that had not put to sea, even as Wat the Tanner led his own mob of howling ruffians against the Gate of the Gods. Though King's Landing boasted massive walls and stout towers, they had been designed to repel attacks from outside the city, not from within its walls. The garrison at the Gate of the Gods was especially weak, as their captain and a third of their number had died with Sir Luther Largent in Cobbler's Square. Those who remained, many wounded, were easily overcome. Wat's followers poured out into the countryside, streaming up the King's Road behind Lord Celtigar's rotting head, toward where, not even Wat seemed certain. Before an hour had passed, the King's Gate and the Lion Gate were open as well. The gold cloaks at the first had fled, whilst the lions, at the other had thrown in with the mobs. 3 of the 7 gates of King's Landing were open to Rhaenyra's foes. The most dire threat to the Queen's rule proved to be within the city, however. At nightfall, the shepherd had appeared once more to resume his preaching in Cobbler's Square. The corpses from last night's fighting had been cleared away during the day, we are told, but not before they had been looted of their clothes and coin and other valuables, and in some cases of their heads as well. As the one-handed prophet shrieked his curses at the vile queen, in the Red Keep, 100 severed heads looked up at him, swaying atop tall spears and sharpened staffs. The crowd, Septon Eustace says, was twice as large and thrice as fearful as the night before. Like the queen they so despised, the shepherds, lambs, were looking to the sky with dread, fearing that King Aegon's dragons would arrive before the night was out, with an army close behind them. No longer believing that the queen could protect them, they looked to their shepherd for salvation. But that prophet answered, "When the dragons come, your flesh will burn and blister and turn to ash. Your wives will dance in gowns of fire, shrieking as they burn, lewd and naked underneath the flames. And you shall see your little children weeping, weeping, till their eyes do melt and slide like jelly down their faces, till their pink flesh falls black and crackling from their bones. The stranger comes, he comes, to scourge us for our sins. Prayers cannot stay his wrath, no more than tears can quench the flame of dragons. Only blood can do that. Your blood, my blood, their blood." Then he raised his right arm and jabbed the stump of his missing hand at Rhaenys's hill behind him, at the dragon pit black against the stars. "There the demons dwell, up there. Fire and blood and fire. This is their city. If you would make it yours, first must you destroy them. If you would cleanse yourself of sin, first must you bathe in dragon's blood. For only blood can quench the fires of hell."